Hello, and welcome to the Knights in the Nightmare Let's Play. This video is a little different. There's no gameplay in this video. Instead, what I wanted to do was touch base on the plot and characters that we've run across so far. You may have noticed that the plot in this game is a little convoluted, and so before we got too much further, I wanted to touch base and make sure everyone was on the same page. So, starting with what we know of course, we play as the Wisp, which is represented as this ball of light. And of course the Wisp's greatest power, I suppose, is the ability to manipulate the dead knights that he finds and allows them to materialize and then attack enemies. That's of course the basic gameplay mechanic that we get through the game with. So as the Wisp, we wisp around, have adventures, kill enemies. We've also run into another character, an armored maiden. She's joined up with us now, and she seems to know what's going on, but she doesn't seem to talk much either. So, let's get into this and discuss who's who and what's going on. Now, first things first, I do want to establish the setting that this game takes place in. The kingdom is the Glevnir Kingdom. Glevnir, I think I'm going to go with that pronunciation. Unfortunately, there's no maps for this land. There's nothing online. The supplemental material doesn't have anything, and there's no maps within the game that I'm aware of. Well, for me, it makes it easier to visualize what's going on and where we're going and where we've been if I have something to work off of. So I went ahead and did something that I actually said I wasn't never going to do. I made a map. Now, I got a couple disclaimers here. I'm not an artist. It's going to be very obvious that I'm not an artist. So this map is disgusting, it's ugly, it's hideous, it's kind of funny really, it's really bad. So you can expect poor color choices, poor use of space, that kind of thing. It's just a really ugly map, I'm sorry. But on top of that, I really don't claim it to be especially accurate. The real idea, I guess, is to at least get a relative sense of locations. So it might not be a perfect map, but at the very least, we might be able to tell, oh, I see this place is west from this other place, or, you know, this one place is north of this place we just came from. Something along those lines. So, once again, I don't claim this to be even remotely close to accurate, but hopefully it can at least help us visualize what's happening. And I do apologize for the way it looks, it's pretty bad. Alright, so having said all that, let's take a look. So, as I mentioned, this is the Glevnir Kingdom. It's been described as being in rule for thousands of years with the same lineage, the same king line. However, the land is described as being in decay. So, it's getting scummier, the plants are dying, the animals are dying, that kind of thing. There hasn't been really a reason given, just that it's been in decline for the past couple hundred years, I think it says. Anyway, one of the major landmarks of this kingdom is Lake Noir, and there it is, just a blob of blue. Anyway, the lake, I believe, is located in the center of the kingdom, and the lake got bigger for some reason. In the middle of the lake is a rocky, craggy island called St. Celestina Island. And in the middle of that island is Aventhium Castle. Now, of course, this is a kingdom, so naturally the king lives in the castle, and so sure enough, there's our castle here in the middle of this island that's in the middle of Lake Noir. We actually see this castle in the opening title screen before the actual title itself comes up, and there you can see it. Yep, it certainly looks like a fantasy castle. It's a pretty cool portrait if you ask me. Anyway, that is on Celestina Island in the middle of Lake Noir. Now, the only way to get to Aventhium Castle is a bridge called Dussel Bridge. And on one end of the bridge, we have Fort Gerhard, which is described as a stronghold of the nation. Obviously, you can tell it's there to defend the castle. It's a pretty strategic location, I guess you could say. And it's at the end of the Dussel Bridge. On the other side is a town called Regniberg, a port town, and this is the capital of the Glevnir Kingdom. So I imagine it's the largest town, although I don't know that for a fact. It's obviously a port town. It gets a lot of its commerce from Lake Noir through fishing or trade. To the north and east of this Regniberg town is a valled forest, described as the Silent Forest. And finally, in that valled forest, there's an important landmark. In the northern corner is an abandoned church. We actually begin the game there. So, here it is in all its glory, this revolting map. Like I said, I don't really claim this to be 100% accurate, but for me at least it helps visualize what's going on. So, where do we go from here? Well, before the game begins, there's a little cutscene in which we see the Armored Maiden. Right here she's pictured. She's actually in the castle in this scene, and she's stealing something. She's stealing the urn that contains the Wisp's soul, or excuse me, the King's soul, which is the Wisp. So we see her bending over, picking this up, and then she runs through the castle and just beats the shit out of anyone who gets in her way. It's kind of brutal, actually. I mean, it's just no contest. She beats the shit out of them. From there, she scampers off and goes to the abandoned church. Now, I don't know this for a fact, but I assume that her path must have looked like this. Although, I don't know. I mean, for all I know, she took a boat. The important thing, though, is that she got to the abandoned church. Then the game begins, and we see a cutscene where she's performing a ritual in this church, which revives the Wisp, awakens it. At that point, she hears some noise, which presumably were monsters, and she has to go take care of it, so she leaves the Wisp alone. Meanwhile, the Wisp gets jumped by monsters, and then, of course, the game begins. So, we start our game, we learn how to play, we learn how to dodge attacks, we learn how to attack with the knights that are on the field, we know how to destroy objects, all that kind of thing. So, we have our fun and games, and then at the end of the scene, we are told that, yes, we've recruited a knight. In the first scene, we recruited Johann Elliot, a warrior. And immediately after the scene, we were given a flashback, which in this case showed us how Johann died. Now, during the course of the game, that mission, we found a knitted scarf, which had sentimental value to Johann, and then we gave it to him, which woke up his soul, and that's the reason why he joined us permanently then. So now he's a permanent member of our army. Now, the plot in this game follows a couple different paths, unfortunately. It makes it a little complicated. Generally, we can assume that if we see a cutscene that's in color, then that is progressing in a chronological fashion. So that makes sense. The game begins, we see a cutscene where the Armored Maiden performs her ritual and wakes up the Wisp. We finish scene 1, and then we're given another cutscene in which the knights react to the Wisp being stolen. Later on down the road, we finish scene 3, and in this case we see a cutscene where we see the Cardinal for the first time. But the point I'm trying to make is we can assume that these scenes happen in chronological order, so we're being told the correct order that they happen. Of course, at the end of the scene, we're also always given a flashback scene, which tells something that happened prior to the game beginning. So in this case, the first scene we got, like I mentioned, we got a cutscene that shows us when Johann dies. Now, these cutscenes are interesting because they're told, and they give us a distinct date when it's happened. So you can see this is midnight, one day before the attack on Regniberg. Now the question is, well, when the hell did that happen? And it's not very clear at first until you start to piece it together. So instead of a nice straight line, the flashbacks are given in pretty random order, unfortunately. So for example, the night before the fall of the Western Tower, well, I mean, when was that? The 3 nights after the tragedy at Venthium Castle. Well, okay, when was the tragedy? 1 day before the attack on Regniberg? Well, okay, I'm getting confused here. Why are there so many different things going on? Now, to be completely honest, this image is a little exaggerated. A lot of times the flashbacks will be given in a certain point of the game when they're relevant. So, for example, we did fight a monster on Dussel Bridge called Revulia. And the scenes leading up to that fight and a few after the fight all concerned Revulia in the flashbacks. So it's not as bad as I've got here, but it's still kind of confusing. So, before we actually get to the actual timeline and the plot, I do want to review the characters that we've met so far so that we can get on the same page with that. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Now, of course, we play as the Wisp, as I've mentioned. I really like that the Wisp is advancing screen. That usually is at the bottom screen while the top screen has some kind of a cutscene. I can't put my finger on it. I think it's just kind of a romanticized indication of, yes, we're making progress, we're pushing on, we're going to do it. Well, for whatever reason, though, I like it. Anyway, we do know that the Wisp is the dead king, King Wilmgard. There he is. He's quite the bearded badass. So the things we know about the king are that, of course, as the king, he ruled the kingdom, the Glevnir kingdom. He lived in Aventhium Castle, and remember that was in the middle of St. Celestina Island, which in turn was in the middle of Lake Noir there. What else do we know about him? He was called the Lionheart King because he would fight in the front lines during battle, and apparently he was quite the kick-ass warrior. Unfortunately, of course, he's dead. That happened before the game began. He was killed, and we begin the game as the Wisp. So, as the Wisp, what do we know about the Wisp? Well, it's a couple times in the game it's been referred to as either the Arbitrator or the Sign of the Arbitrator. So, for whatever reason, we haven't been told why, but that's certainly a distinct title that the Wisp has. Now, in addition to the powers that I mentioned before, where he can get the dead knights to attack for him, he also has the power to hear the thoughts of people he touches. I want to point out that this is not a conversation. He's not talking to them. All he's doing is he's eavesdropping on their inner thoughts. So, a little creepy, I suppose, but it's just one of his powers, and we'll take advantage of it, I suppose. Another thing to point out is that the Wisp currently does not have its memory. So, of course, the king died. It was resurrected by some kind of a ritual. Possibly because he's the arbitrator. I imagine that's probably why he was able to be brought back. But as of right now, he doesn't understand who he is or what's going on. So really, he's being led by instinct alone. Now, aside from the king, we also have the Armored Maiden to talk about. There she is in her portrait, and then her in-game portrait in the upper right there. I like the art in this game. I love it. The thing with the Armored Maiden, though, I cannot quite grasp her helmet. Is it like coming out towards me? Like, is her other eye covered up? I don't get it. It just messes with my brain. Anyway, we have seen her, as I mentioned at the first point we saw her was before the game began, where she was crouching over stealing the urn that contained the Wisp. And then she runs through the castle, she beats the hell out of anyone who gets in her way. She takes us to the abandoned church and performs a ritual, and then gets drawn away because she hears a monster talking or whatever. Later, much later, she meets up with us on Dussel Bridge and says, "Hey, I want to join up with you." And Wisp seems to react to that and seems to accept what she's saying. So, what do we know about this Armored Maiden? Well, at a superficial level, she does have some pretty sweet gear. Her sword's pretty kick-ass, she has a nice cape. If you notice in the cutscenes, she really does seem better dressed than the other knights. Just an interesting little note. She's pretty strong. In fact, after she joined us, she's become one of my stronger fighters. It's kind of funny, my previous 2 playthroughs, I didn't really want to use her too much just because I'd want to stick to my own army. I've been using her more this time, and holy shit, what have I been doing? And she's a great fighter. She's great to have along. She does seem to know what's going on, but for whatever reason, she's not too straightforward with it. Now, that might be because she wants to just keep private for whatever reason. There's something she doesn't want us to know. Although it could also be that since the Wisp doesn't have his memory, she might just think it's not worth even talking to him yet until he gets his marbles together. She has mentioned a couple times that she's looking for a holy staff called the Ancardia. She's been searching for it. Something about she had a contract, there was a contract involved. Someone didn't understand the consequences of something, presumably the contract, and for whatever reason she needs to track down that staff. As a matter of fact, there's someone else looking for the staff, and we've run into them, haven't we? So on the Fortress Sky Bridge, this fort being Fort Gerhard, she spoke out loud, said, "You're looking for it too." And then the angel Melissa came down and said, "No, it's my staff, fuck you." And at that point, weapons were drawn, and as we saw in the last video, we actually had to fight Melissa and drove her off. So, certainly that staff seems to be important, although we don't really know what it does, do we? Alright, so we've covered the king and the Armored Maiden, whose name is Maria, by the way. However, there is someone else to mention. The king has a son. Now, we've not seen the son yet in the game, at least as a human, but we have seen him as a werewolf. In fact, he was a boss fight. And that happened in the Vald Forest in the southern portion, so right around there. And this son of ours, this werewolf, has connections to the cardinal, or rather the cardinal's granddaughter. So here we are looking at the cardinal himself. We'll get into more details with him later. But he does have a granddaughter named Peach, and we first see her in the cutscene after scene 3, in which she says, "Oh, I miss Prince Nordich lately. I haven't seen him." And the cardinal at the time's like, "Oh, shit. He's busy. Yeah, sorry, he's busy." And she's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I wish I could see him. It's so sad," etc., etc. So, yeah, the cardinal definitely knows something happened there. Whether he knows if the prince is a werewolf or if he knows if he's dead, we don't know at this point. But he's certainly hiding something from Peach. So it would make sense. We do know that the cardinal's the bad guy, and we know that the king is dead, presumably at the cardinal's hands, but we'll get into that later. So it makes sense that the cardinal would want the lineage wiped out completely. So it makes sense that the cardinal might know something about the prince's disappearance. Another note to mention is that the cardinal and Peach are blood relatives. In fact, Peach is his last surviving blood relative, so she certainly means a lot to him. That'll come into play later. Anyway, so as I mentioned, we'd actually run into the werewolf. He's a boss fight. So we have our fun and games, and we beat him up and finally kill him. His last words to speak were "Father," before he keels over dead. To which the Wisp doesn't really react because, well, he doesn't have his memories, he doesn't know anything about it. He apparently didn't think too much of it. So, sure enough, we are the king. We've killed our prince. At the time, the king didn't have his memories, so he can't really hold him accountable, I suppose. It's just a tragedy that happened. Unfortunately, the prince was a werewolf. We don't know why yet. That will come into play later. And so that was part of our mission, or part of our story. That was actually only in scene 3, I think, 3 or 4. So it happened fairly early in the game, even. Alright, let's get back to the Cardinal and Peach. So, as I mentioned, they are blood relation. Peach just seems to be kind of this waif that lives in the castle. I don't think she has any clout or anything like that. Just that she's under the protection, obviously, of the Cardinal. The Cardinal himself is described as a powerful man who had a lot of responsibilities in the castle. He does have a few lackeys as well, which we've met over the course of the game. The first one being Aquina. Now, I think I've changed my pronunciation of her name every time she's come up. I'm going to stick with one now. I'm going to go Aquina. Alright, Aquina. That's it. That's what I'm going to go with. Anyway, we've seen Aquina. She is a member of the Third Order. And actually, the first time we met her was an interesting little scene where she talked to the Cardinal. This is actually the first time that Cape Horn's name was revealed to us as well. But as we see in the scene, she approaches him and basically shows deference and says, yeah, we've not been doing well, I'm sorry. To that, Cardinal Cape Horn responds with, well, I know you can do it, I need you to do this, pull together. And she responds with, yeah, I'll do it, leave it to me, I'll take care of it. So, she certainly gave an impression of having respect for the Cardinal, being a good soldier, that kind of thing. There's another lackey of the Cape Horns, and his name is Lionel. He is also a member of the Third Order, and he has basically come off as kind of a brash swordsman, a young upstart, someone who thinks he's hot shit, that kind of thing. The first time we see him is actually a scene between him and Aquina, which happened in the Castle Round Table. Basically, they kind of bantered back and forth, where she was admonishing him for being lazy, and he kind of calls out, well, you really suck up to Cape Horn. And then he goes as far as to give her advice, which she didn't take too kindly to, and so she basically calls him out and says, well, if you're scared, then just hide. And he didn't care for that too much, obviously, being a brash, young go-getter, whatever. So an interesting interchange between two of his top lackeys. Apparently they don't get along too well. There is another person that Cape Horn has working underneath him, and that's, of course, the witch Yelma. Yelma is an interesting case because we don't actually see her for a while. We just hear about her. That's an interesting change from the other characters. For example, Cape Horn, he's kind of an interesting figure in that we don't know his motives yet, but we do have kind of a grasp of his personality just based on his interactions with other people. The same with Aquina and Leonel. We've watched them interact with one another, and from that we've kind of drawn conclusions to what their personalities are. Yelma is a different story in that we hear about her much earlier than when we actually see her. So we get other characters' impressions of her before we actually lay eyes on her ourselves. And so based on that, of course, we have our own opinions of what she must be like before we actually see for ourselves. It's an interesting choice the developers made, and it actually paid off pretty good, I would say. First mention we even hear of her is some knights that are bitching that some witch got appointed to general. The gist of the conversation was basically they were upset that someone got risen through the ranks so quickly. And no one seemed to like it, but they didn't want to gossip too much. They didn't want to get overheard, so they said, all right, let's just stop. The next time she comes up is when Cape Horn orders a meeting between himself, Aquina, Leonel, and Yelma doesn't show up. Cape Horn's like, well, what the hell, she didn't show up? And then he assigns another knight, Vishna, who's not an important knight. Anyway, he assigns her to watch Yelma and keep an eye on her and report if something happens or she does something weird. Once that knight leaves Vishna, then Leonel just comes right out and says, I don't like her. It'd be better if we just got rid of her. Let's just kill her. And Aquina agrees. So these two have been shown fighting with one another, but they certainly agree that Yelma's a creepy weirdo and we need to get rid of her. Of course, Cape Horn responds to that with, well, we can still use her, so I don't want to kill her yet. With all that being said about her, finally we get to see what she looks like. And there she is, kind of this ornate, decadent, jester or whatever. So we have this idea of what she's like. Her friends, I shouldn't say friends, her contemporaries don't like her. And then the first time we actually see her in a cutscene, she's talking to another knight and basically saying, how are we doing with wiping out the resisting knights? Have we killed all the survivors? So we finally get to see her in action, and her first thing she's talking about is, we've killed everyone, right? As a little aside, this scene takes place, as you can see, from the Sky Bridge, and that's actually very close to where we fought Melissa. So we're getting close to where Yelma was standing. Anyway, she's talking to this knight. He says, yeah, I think we've taken care of them. And she's like, all right, great, now get lost. And then when he's gone, she starts a monologue to herself about how she's meant for other things. She's more powerful than this. The other guys are her puppets, etc., etc. Later on, we see Yelma talking to this shadowy, squiggly monster-looking thing, and she talks really casually to it with a lot of force, I suppose. Just really abrupt, and talks as though he's no threat, even though it's this weird-looking monster thing. She's talking to this thing that she names as Zolganark, who at the time he's worried about not being able to sense Revulia anymore, and that's of course because we killed her. At that point, Yelma says, well, don't worry about it. I have a powerful servant at Fort Gerhard, which, reminder, that's where we are in the story right now. And, this special servant, I crafted a special type of armor for him. Oh, ho, 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 ho. So, she's pretty brashly talking to this monster thing, so, I know, thus far, she's not showing respect to anybody. Finally, later, we see a cutscene in which Cape Horn goes up to Yelma and starts complaining to her about, you didn't show up to our meeting, what the hell? And I didn't give you any leave to disregard my orders. To which Yelma says, I'm wondering what you would say, but I don't think it'd be something that moronic. And at this point, I love Cape Horn's reaction. It's just, what? He doesn't know how to react. It's just hilarious. This tells us more about Cape Horn, too. I mean, he's not used to this insubordination. He's just stunned. He's, what? I'm sorry, this is funny as shit. Anyway, Yelma then goes on to say, yeah, I know about the secret you're keeping from me. And I know everything, so fuck you. Once again, Cape Horn doesn't know how to react. He's just... I'm sorry, I don't like Cape Horn, so I enjoy seeing him twist on the hook like this. That's good. So he's panicking. He's like, oh, fuck me. Then she goes on to kind of shift the attention to something else. She says, you should be watching for that angel. She's been sneaking around. What's she doing? Well, we do know that the angel was most likely Melissa, the angel we fought. And what's she doing? Well, we also know that she's looking for that staff, Ancardia. Although it sounds like Capehorn and Yelma don't know anything about that staff, so that's interesting. The angel Melissa is apparently keeping a secret. So we have Yelma here. She is also a part of the Third Order, I should mention. And she has a connection to this monster, this Zolganark thing. She actually names him Zolganark, like I mentioned. And the whole conversation here I'm going to cover really quickly. We fought the Revulia boss on Dussel Bridge. And of course we killed her. At that time, Zolganark was like, Revulia? Well, I can't hear you, where are you? And he mentions to Yelma, I can't find this Revulia, what the fuck? At the time, we also got cutscenes from flashbacks explaining after the tragedy, Revulia was planted on the bridge. That was one night after the tragedy of Aventium Castle, and the tragedy is also the time when the king was killed. So Revulia was placed on the bridge, and a distant voice, of course that being Zolganark's, saying, no one can get past. So, Zolganark very intentionally put a roadblock cutting off the castle. That's interesting to know. Here we are. That's our rogue gallery for this game so far. Let's recap who we've talked about as far as the bad guys are concerned. So we have Cardinal Capehorn. And now you might have noticed I haven't really talked a whole lot about Capehorn himself, and that's because I would go ahead and say at this time we don't really know a whole lot about him. We know that he caused the tragedy, or else he had a part in it at the very least. We also know that he wanted the king dead. Okay, fair enough. As far as his demeanor, he talks nicely to people. He seems, as crazy as it sounds, he seems like a kindly old man. The way he speaks to Aquina and says stuff like, good job, I know you can do it, that kind of thing. He also doesn't really seem to know how to react to people being insubordinate to him. When Yelma mouths off to him, he just kind of stands there flabbergasted like a dumbass. Anyway, so he's at the head of he's one of the linchpins of this whole plot. We don't know his motives yet. He does have, as I mentioned, a granddaughter named Peach. She is his last blood relation, so she means everything to him. I get the writings on the wall there that she's certainly a weakness for Capehorn, huh? Underneath Capehorn, he has a couple lackeys. The first one being Aquina. Fuck, how do I pronounce that? Aquina. Now, I didn't point this out before, but in the cutscenes, it's a little hard to tell, but she's carrying a crossbow. So just be advised that that's her weapon, a crossbow. He also has another lackey, Leonil, and he's a swordsman. Finally, of course, Yelma, the witch, who kind of does whatever the fuck she wants. All three of those people belong to the Third Order of Knights. Now, I'm going to read from the Tome of Lost Souls, which is the pre-order book that came with the game, and read the description of the Third Order. So according to the Tome of Lost Souls, this is a hand-picked group of elite forces led by Cardinal Capehorn. Though small in number, members like Leonil, Aquina, and Yelma excel in battle. Very often the Order acts alone or on solo missions. It is a controversial order because its movements are secretive and usually politically motivated. According to the game designer Ito, it's a small group of elite forces hand-picked by Cardinal Capehorn himself. They're quite the eccentric bunch that all have strong individualistic personalities. If I could spit that out. So we have this secretive order that Capehorn handles, and he sends them off on weird secret missions. And of that order, his top three generals are Aquina, Leonil, and Yelma. Now, let's move on. Yelma, we know, has a connection to that Zolganark creature. At this time, we've not seen Zolganark interact with anyone else, so we don't know if they're aware of him or if they're in cahoots or whatever. Finally, we have the angel Melissa, which we fought in the last scene. We didn't kill her, we drove her off, though. And we know from their conversation that Capehorn and Yelma are at the very least aware of Melissa, but if nothing else, it sounds like she's actually on their side. The way Yelma said, you should be keeping an eye on Melissa, the angel. And Capehorn being all like, duh? Alright, so those are our bad guys. Before we move on yet again, there's one last thing I want to touch on. There's another race in this Glevnir kingdom. So right now we've been discussing, I'm going to call them humans. I guess I don't know that for a fact, but we're going to say humans. So Cape Horn, the King, Yelma, Aquina, Maria, as far as we're aware, they're all humans. The other race are the Tiamats, and they are non-human. What we do know about them, we haven't seen any on screen yet, but we know that for hundreds of years there's been a feud between them and the humans of the Glevnir kingdom. And as far as we know, the Tiamats are on the losing end of this feud. So they've been marginalized and pushed around, and they're on the outs with the kingdom, and it's not looking too good for them. Another thing we happen to know is that physically the Tiamats have horns and wings. We saw that in a cutscene when one of the knights mentioned that. Also, we also know that King Wilmgard wanted to make a blood tie with the Tiamats. Now, to that end, the prince was betrothed to the Tiamat princess. The princess being Princess Alier, who we've not seen in game yet. Now, during that cutscene when we first saw Aquina, and she was discussing things with Cape Horn, one of the things that came up was, hey, where's the Tiamat princess? Where's Alier? And Aquina says, well, we're looking, we'll find her. So the princess is gone. Interesting, huh? I don't want to get too, I don't want to draw too much conjecture, I guess. But we do know that the princess was betrothed to the prince, and the prince is now mysteriously gone. He was turned into a werewolf and then later killed. It's probably not a stretch to think that the princess may be in hiding. I certainly wouldn't want to interact with these goons, that's for sure. Alright, we've covered the characters. I think this is a good stopping point. Next time we're going to start cobbling together the timeline. God help me. I've got an Excel spreadsheet started, and I've written down all the dates and all that kind of thing. So I think I have the correct order of events. I'm always subject to error, as you guys are aware. But I think this is a good stopping point. We'll cover the flashbacks next video. And then I think the video after that will cover the current timeline. So what happened since the game has begun, since we started playing the game. And then hopefully after that we'll get back to some gameplay. It's been quite a while and I miss playing the game, so I'm looking forward to getting back to that. Alright, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.